Fog covered Riverside Park when Officer Adrian Knox noticed a German Shepherd sitting perfectly still in the snow. The dog was chained to an empty bench, too weak to run and too watchful to surrender. Beside him waited an old suitcase and a note blurred by melting snow. It did not ask anyone to find its owner. It said the dog was the only evidence. Orion never barked for help, but every glance toward the road carried the name of a missing family. Adrian followed that silent promise into a case of fear, corruption, and loyalty stronger than violence. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe to K9 Justice Tales. Fog lay low over Riverside Park, flattening the morning into shades of silver. The river beyond the bare cottonwoods had not frozen completely. Black water moved beneath shelves of ice, slow and heavy, making a soft grinding sound whenever the current shifted. Snow covered the walking paths except where wind had combed narrow lines across the surface. Sergeant Adrian Knox drove with one hand resting lightly on the wheel of his patrol SUV. At 40, Adrian still carried the lean, athletic build of the ice rescue volunteer he had once been. His shoulders filled the dark navy winter uniform beneath his coat, but there was nothing bulky or theatrical about him. He moved like a man accustomed to unstable ground, balanced, deliberate, never wasting a step. The patrol road curved past the empty playground. Adrian glanced toward the river, then toward the row of benches facing the water. He almost missed the shape beside the last one. Almost. He eased off the accelerator. Something dark sat against the white ground, too large to be a trash bag and too still to be a person. The fog shifted, exposing two pointed ears. Adrian stopped the vehicle. For several seconds, he remained behind the wheel. The shepherd sat upright beside a wooden bench, facing the road that led out of the park. Snow had collected along the dog's back and between the upright ears. A chain ran from the collar to one leg of the bench. The animal did not turn toward the SUV. Adrian reached for the radio clipped near his shoulder. "Dispatch, Knox. I'm stopping at Riverside Park. Possible abandoned animal." A burst of static answered before the dispatcher acknowledged him. Adrian shut off the engine. The heater died, and the silence outside seemed to move closer. He pulled on his black gloves and stepped into the cold. His boots sank slightly into fresh snow. As he approached, the dog's ears shifted toward him, but the head remained pointed at the empty road. "Easy," Adrian said. His voice was low, the same tone he had once used while crawling across thinning lake ice, toward people who had stopped believing they would be reached. The German Shepherd finally looked at him. The dog was male, full-grown, and should have been powerful. Instead, the ribs showed beneath the wet black and tan coat. The waist was too narrow. Mud had dried along the hind legs, and clumps of fur were pressed flat against the sides. Even in that condition, several markings stood out. A black saddle covered most of the back before curling like a hook above the right hip. Two middle toes on the left front paw were black. A thin golden streak angled beneath the right eye, and the tip of the right ear carried a small rounded notch. His amber-brown eyes were alert but exhausted. Adrian had seen frightened dogs before. Some barked until their voices broke. Some flattened themselves to the ground. Others watched hands waiting for the first blow. This dog watched the road. Adrian stopped several feet away and crouched without reaching forward. "You waiting for somebody?" The shepherd gave no response. Only then did Adrian notice the suitcase. It rested on the opposite side of the bench, half buried in snow. The brown leather was cracked and darkened by moisture. Old travel stickers covered the sides. Chicago, Duluth, Denver, St. Louis, many of them peeled at the corners. A strip of white paper had been tied to the handle with blue thread. The wind lifted it, then dropped it again. Adrian shifted closer. The shepherd's head moved sharply, eyes tracking his hand. "All right," Adrian murmured. "I see it." He did not touch the suitcase. Instead, he examined the chain. It looped twice around a metal support beneath the bench and connected to a faded reddish-brown collar. The links were old, but the padlock was new. Someone had not merely left the dog there. Someone had made certain he could not follow. Adrian's jaw tightened. He reached slowly toward the collar. The shepherd trembled once, an involuntary movement that passed through the shoulders, but he did not pull away. The fur around the neck had been rubbed thin. Raw patches showed beneath it, irritated by metal and cold. Adrian's thumb brushed the scratched edge of the black watch on his left wrist. He checked the temperature displayed on the face, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Falling. How long have you been sitting here? The dog blinked. Adrian took a compact bolt cutter from the emergency compartment on his belt. He positioned it around the weakest chain link. The click of metal made the shepherd flinch so violently that his paws slid in the snow. Adrian stopped. Not touching you, he said, just the chain. He waited until the dog's breathing slowed. Then he cut the link. The chain fell into the snow. For one expectant moment, Adrian thought the shepherd would run. The dog stood, joints stiff, and took a single step away from the bench. Then he turned back, not toward the road, toward the suitcase. He placed himself between Adrian and the old leather case, body unsteady but deliberate. There was no growl, no bared teeth. He simply stood guard over it. Adrian studied him. The shepherd had been freezing, restrained, and alone, yet freedom was not the first thing he wanted. Whatever had happened here, the suitcase mattered to him. "All right," Adrian said quietly. "It comes with us." The dog remained in place until Adrian moved to the far side of the bench and untied the paper from the handle. The note was soft from snow and fog. Ink had run in blue veins across the page. Most of the writing was impossible to read, but one sentence remained clear. "Please save him. He is the only evidence." Adrian read it twice. The wording disturbed him more than a direct plea for help would have. Not take care of him. Not he needs a home. Evidence. His eyes went back to the dog. The shepherd was looking beyond him again, toward the park entrance. Adrian felt a familiar pressure begin beneath his ribs, the old warning that a scene was larger than it first appeared. He had learned to respect that sensation, but not to confuse it with proof. He pulled an evidence glove over his right hand and lifted the suitcase by the bottom rather than the handle. The smell reached him immediately. Bleach. Sharp, concentrated, and wrong in the clean winter air. Underneath it was another odor, faintly metallic. Adrian angled the suitcase toward the pale morning light. Along one lower seam, beneath a crust of frozen dirt, a dark reddish-brown smear marked the leather. Blood, most likely. He did not open the case. He photographed the suitcase, note, chain, bench, and surrounding snow. No clear footprints remained near the path. Overnight wind had softened everything into shallow depressions. The shepherd watched each movement. When Adrian finished, he opened the rear door of the SUV and spread a gray emergency blanket across the seat. "Come on." The dog looked into the vehicle, but did not move. Adrian stepped away to give him space. Still nothing. The shepherd's gaze shifted toward the suitcase, now sitting several feet from the open passenger door. Adrian understood. He placed the suitcase carefully on the front floorboard where the dog could see it through the gap between the seats. Only then did the shepherd approach the SUV. He tried to jump but lacked the strength. His front paws struck the edge of the seat and his hind legs folded beneath him. Adrian caught him under the chest. The dog went rigid in his arms. For half a second, Adrian felt the animal's heart hammering against his forearm. Then the tension eased enough for him to lift the shepherd onto the blanket. "You're all right," Adrian said, though he knew the words were premature. The dog turned twice before lying down. He kept his head raised, eyes fixed on the suitcase. Adrian closed the door gently. Before getting behind the wheel, he stood beside the empty bench. The severed chain lay in the snow like something shed but not escaped. He thought of whoever had written the note. Someone frightened enough to leave evidence in a public park, yet careful enough to choose a place where a patrol car would eventually pass. Or desperate enough to gamble on it. Adrian put the damp paper into an evidence sleeve and returned to the SUV. The shelter did not open until 9. He called anyway and reached a recorded message. The county veterinary clinic had not begun its morning shift either. He radioed dispatch again. "I'm bringing the dog and an associated item to the station. Notify the evidence technician on duty. Possible blood on the case. Copy. Do you need animal control?" "Not yet." Adrian pulled onto the park road. Heat gradually filled the vehicle. In the rearview mirror, the shepherd's eyes followed him. "You've got a name?" One ear twitched. Adrian did not expect an answer. The question had escaped him because silence inside the SUV had become too dense. At the next stop sign, his keys shifted against the ignition. A small cobalt blue enamel star tapped lightly against the steering column. His daughter had made it years ago before the fire. One point was uneven, and her fingerprint remained trapped beneath the glaze. Adrian carried it without looking at it most days. The shepherd's gaze moved toward the sound. Adrian closed his hand briefly around the keychain. Then he looked through the windshield at the fog thinning above North Star Falls. The dog had not barked once, had not fought the chain, had not cried while Adrian touched the wounds around his neck. Yet Adrian could feel the animal's urgency as clearly as if it had filled the vehicle with noise. Orion, he said. The name came from the winter constellation his daughter had once insisted was visible from every bedroom window in town. The shepherd blinked. Strong enough to find your way through the dark. No reaction followed, but Adrian let the name remain. At the station, he parked near the secured rear entrance and carried the suitcase inside first. Orion became restless the moment it disappeared from view, pushing unsteadily to his feet. "I'm coming back." Adrian returned and helped him down from the SUV. Orion leaned against Adrian's leg for balance, then immediately searched for the suitcase. Only after seeing it beside the evidence room door did he allow himself to be guided inside. The station was quiet, still caught between the night shift and morning staff. Fluorescent lights cast a muted glow over the tiled corridor. Adrian found a folded blanket, a stainless steel bowl, and a small package of emergency dog food kept for animal calls. Orion drank before he ate. He did both cautiously, stopping every few seconds to listen. Adrian removed the damaged collar after photographing it. Beneath the grime, he found a small metal tag pressed into the fur. It carried no phone number, only one scratched letter that might once have been an O. Orion lowered himself onto the blanket. Adrian sat at the nearest terminal and opened the regional incident database. He entered the park location, the note's wording, and a basic description of the dog. 3 current alerts appeared. 2 were unrelated stolen vehicles. The third was a missing person bulletin filed by North Star Falls Regional Hospital 72 hours earlier. Adrian opened it. A photograph showed a 35-year-old nurse with chestnut hair tied low behind her neck and green-brown eyes that looked tired even while she smiled. Rachel Arden, missing with her 10-year-old son, Noah Arden, and her 68-year-old mother, Evelyn Arden. Adrian read the home address, then the date they had last been seen. Behind him, the metal bowl shifted across the floor. He turned. Orion was no longer lying down. The shepherd stood on trembling legs, ears pointed forward, eyes fixed on the monitor as though the name itself had entered the room. Adrian looked at the photograph again. Rachel Arden? Orion's body shuddered. Then, for the first time since the park, a sound escaped him, a low, broken whine that seemed to have been held inside for days. Adrian slowly rose from the chair. The note lay sealed beside the old suitcase. "Please save him. He is the only evidence." Now Adrian understood one thing with certainty. Orion had not been abandoned by a stranger. He had been sent. By 8 o'clock, the evidence room had lost whatever warmth the rest of the station possessed. The vents pushed out air that smelled faintly of dust and heated metal, but the concrete walls held the night's cold. Adrian stood beside the stainless steel examination table, watching a bead of melted snow slide from the suitcase and collect near one cracked corner. Orion lay on a folded blanket several feet away. The German shepherd had eaten only half the food Adrian had given him. He remained thin, exhausted, and visibly uncomfortable around the neck, yet sleep never fully claimed him. Every few minutes, one amber eye opened to check that the suitcase was still there. Adrian had already sealed the damp note separately, photographed the chain, and logged the collar. What remained was the object Orion had refused to leave behind. The door opened without ceremony. You always managed to find the cheerful cases before breakfast. Talia Monroe entered carrying a cobalt laptop bag in one hand and a paper cup in the other. She was 39, compact and quick-moving, with warm brown skin and tightly curled black hair braided into a low knot. Rectangular copper-red glasses framed dark amber eyes that seemed permanently unimpressed by incomplete explanations. She set the coffee aside and studied the table. "That the suitcase?" Adrian nodded. "And the dog? Same scene." Talia glanced at Orion. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for the usual sharpness around her mouth to soften. "He looks rough. He was chained outside." In 14-degree weather, closer to 12 by the time we left. Talia looked back at Adrian. You call animal services? Clinic sending someone over. You name him yet? Orion. She raised an eyebrow. You found a starving dog tied to a bench beside possible blood evidence. And you had time for astronomy? Adrian ignored the remark. Talia pulled on nitrile gloves and moved closer to the suitcase. She did not touch the clasps immediately. Instead, she leaned toward the lower seam and inhaled once. Bleach. Strong enough to notice outside. And that stain? Presumptive blood test pending. Talia's gaze traveled across the travel stickers, the broken stitching, and the blue thread still caught around the handle. Whoever packed this wanted it found, she said, or wanted someone to think that. That too. Adrian appreciated that about her. Talia did not romanticize evidence. She did not call things clues until they behaved like clues. She photographed the clasps, then opened them one at a time. The first gave with a dull metallic snap. Orion lifted his head. The second clasp resisted before releasing. When Talia raised the lid, the odor of bleach intensified, mixed with old leather, damp wool, and the faint copper scent Adrian had already noticed in the park. The inside was arranged too carefully to be abandoned luggage. A gray women's coat had been folded across the top. Beneath it lay a stack of documents wrapped in clear plastic, several printed photographs, and a small black external drive no larger than a matchbox. Talia did not speak for several seconds. Then she said, "That's not panic packing." Adrian looked at the careful layers. No, someone built a package. She photographed each item before removing it. The coat came first. It was slate gray, practical, with a torn cuff and a darkened patch near the inside lining. A hospital parking sticker remained attached to one pocket. The fabric smelled of antiseptic even beneath the bleach. Orion stood. He did not bark or approach. He simply stared at the coat. Adrian lifted it with gloved hands and held it low enough for the dog to smell. Orion took one breath, then another. His posture changed instantly. The stiffness in his shoulders disappeared, replaced by a restless urgency. He pressed his nose into the sleeve, followed the scent toward the collar, then looked toward the evidence room door. "Rachel's?" Talia asked. "Most likely." Orion paced to the door and back. Adrian folded the coat again. The dog watched every movement, then lowered himself beside it instead of returning to the blanket. Talia removed the documents. The first was a property transfer agreement for a house at 218 Willow Creek Road. The owner was listed as Rachel Arden. The receiving party was Damon Arden. Another document transferred control of a savings account. A third concerned 12 acres of riverfront land outside North Star Falls. Several signature lines were blank. Others carried Rachel's name in uneven handwriting, as though written by someone whose hand had been shaking or restrained. Talia held one page under the examination light. Pressure marks. Adrian leaned closer. Indented lines crossed the paper beneath the signature. She signed on top of something else? Maybe. Or someone pressed down on her hand. Talia adjusted the page. "We'll need document analysis before saying more." The photographs were worse. None showed a face clearly. They had been taken close and in poor light. Bruising along a woman's forearm, swelling around a wrist, a split seam on a gray coat, a kitchen floor scattered with broken glass. One picture showed a child's red winter boot near the edge of the frame. Another showed a woman's hand gripping black and tan fur. Talia paused. "Look at the paw." Adrian did. At the bottom corner of the image, partly cut off, was a German shepherd's front leg. 2 middle toes were black. Adrian looked across the room. Orion's left front paw rested against the gray coat. The same 2 toes were dark. The dog was not merely connected to the family, he was in the evidence. Talia turned the photograph over. A date had been written in blue ink. 6 weeks earlier, Adrian felt the case change shape around him. Until that moment, Orion had been a possible witness in the broadest, least useful sense of the word, an animal found near suspicious material. Now the suitcase placed him inside Rachel Arden's home before she disappeared. Talia sealed the photograph in a clear sleeve. Still want to call him a stray? No. The external drive required more care. Talia connected it to an isolated forensic laptop with no access to the department network. The device did not open automatically. Encrypted? Partly. How long? Depends how clever the person was. She began working, fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Adrian watched strings of directories populate the screen. Orion lay beside the coat, but his eyes remained fixed on the soft clicking of Talia's keys. After several minutes, she found a folder disguised as a system file. Inside were audio recordings. The first was 23 seconds long. Talia checked the output level before pressing play. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice emerged, low and controlled. "You sign the house over, Rachel, and this stops being difficult." A woman said something too faint to understand. The man answered, sharper now. "You don't get to negotiate." A sound struck a hard surface. Orion shot to his feet, his coat lifted along the spine. A growl formed low in his chest, not loud, but so concentrated that Talia's hand froze above the keyboard. Adrian moved between the dog and the laptop. "Easy." Orion did not look at him. The voice continued, "You want your mother safe? You want the boy safe? Then you sign what I put in front of you." Behind the words came another sound, a child crying, then a dog barking with frantic force. Orion lunged one step toward the speaker before Adrian caught the soft recovery harness around his chest. The dog's body shook against Adrian's hand. "Turn it off." Talia stopped the recording. Silence returned, but Orion remained braced, staring at the laptop as if the man might step out of it. Adrian lowered himself beside him. The dog's breathing came too quickly. "It's over," Adrian said. The phrase felt dishonest. The recording was over. Whatever memory Orion had entered was not. Talia removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "That reaction will never be courtroom proof," she said quietly. "But it tells us where to look." Adrian's hand remained against Orion's shoulder. He knew the voice or the tone or the crying or all of it. She put her glasses back on. "There are 17 files. Any dates?" "Several. The newest was made 3 days ago, the day Rachel, Noah, and Evelyn disappeared." Talia opened the missing person bulletin on a second monitor and compared the document details. "Damon Arden," she said, "former husband, 39, construction contractor until last year. Any record? 2 domestic disturbance calls. No charges. Rachel declined?" One report says she refused a statement. Another says officers found no visible injuries. Adrian looked at the photographs on the table. Someone had eventually documented the injuries, just not for the police. Talia extracted a still image from one of the files. It showed the front of a small one-story house with pale siding, a narrow porch, and the number 218 fixed beside the door. "Willow Creek," Adrian said. "Matches the transfer documents." He picked up the gray coat. Orion stood with him. "I'm going to the house." Talia gave him a flat look. "With the dog, he knows her scent. He's also dehydrated and probably hasn't slept in days. The clinic can meet us there." "No. The clinic can meet him here." Adrian started to object. Talia pointed at Orion's legs. "He nearly fell getting off the blanket. You take him into an unknown property before a vet clears him, and you're using an injured animal because the case makes you impatient." The words landed harder because they were accurate. Adrian looked down at Orion. The dog was watching the coat again, not the door. "Fine," Adrian said. "Basic exam first." Talia nodded once and returned to the computer. 30 minutes later, a county veterinary technician cleaned Orion's neck, checked his temperature, and confirmed he was underweight but stable enough for limited movement. The technician advised rest, water, and no strenuous tracking. Adrian listened. Then he took Orion to Willow Creek Road. The Arden house stood near the edge of town where sidewalks gave way to frozen drainage ditches. Snow covered the front yard. A child's plastic sled leaned against the porch rail, half buried and untouched. Adrian knocked. No answer. The front door was locked. Through the kitchen window, he saw a broken mug on the floor and a chair lying on its side. Orion pulled toward the side of the house. Not hard, not recklessly. With purpose, Adrian followed. The rear gate hung crooked from one hinge. The latch had been snapped. Beyond it, the snow had been disturbed by several sets of tracks, softened by wind but still visible. One large adult, 2 smaller adult patterns, a child. They led toward a weathered storage shed at the back of the property. Halfway there, the impressions vanished beneath a broad, unnatural sweep. Someone had erased the trail. Orion lowered his nose to the snow. Adrian let him smell the sleeve of Rachel's coat, then loosened the lead. The dog followed the remaining scent to the broken gate, stopped, and pulled toward the alley. Not the shed. The gate. Adrian photographed the tracks in the swept area before approaching the neighboring house. An elderly woman opened the door only after he showed his badge through the glass. She introduced herself as June Halpern, 72, a retired postal clerk with a narrow frame, silver hair pinned behind her ears, and a quilted green coat worn over her nightclothes. Her fear was obvious, but so was her relief at finally being asked. "I heard them that night," she said. "Who?" "Rachel. The boy. A man. Did you recognize him?" June looked toward the Arden house. "I knew the voice. Damon used to come around before the divorce." Adrian showed her the photograph from the state record. June nodded immediately. "That's him? What did you hear?" "Shouting, something breaking. Noah crying," she swallowed. "And that dog. He barked until I thought he'd tear the house apart." "Then what?" "Nothing. Did you see a vehicle? A white work truck. No company name." Adrian wrote down every word. By the time he returned to the station, Talia had traced Damon through old contractor registrations and financial reports. Several of his former vehicles had been photographed near storage properties around Trinity River Bend, an industrial corridor long associated with narcotics movement. The connection was suggestive. It was not enough. Police Chief Victor Sloan stood in Adrian's office doorway, reading the preliminary report. At 57, Victor was tall and spare, with silver hair combed straight back and a face lined by too many winters and too many budget meetings. His gold command badge caught the overhead light when he closed the file. "You have coercive documents, possible domestic violence, and an audio threat," Victor said. "That gets us an active investigation." Adrian waited. "It does not get you permission to search every warehouse from here to Trinity Bend. They've been missing 3 days. I know. Damon has links to that corridor. Links are not locations." Adrian glanced through the glass wall toward the evidence room. Orion was lying beside Rachel's coat, head raised. Victor followed his gaze. "I'm giving you 48 hours, he said. "You establish probable cause tied to a specific property. I will put people behind you, and if I find something before then, you call it in." Adrian looked back at him. Victor's voice hardened. "You do not enter alone. You do not turn that dog into a warrant, and you do not confuse being right with being untouchable." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Adrian nodded. 48 hours. Victor left the office. Across the corridor, Orion lifted his head as Adrian approached. The suitcase was closed again. The voices inside it had been copied, cataloged, and preserved, but they no longer felt trapped in the case. They had entered the station, and now the clock was running. Talia found the coordinates just after noon. Adrian was standing beside Orion's blanket when she appeared at the evidence room door, Cobalt laptop tucked beneath one arm. She did not waste time with an explanation. "I found location data inside one of Rachel's videos." Adrian looked up. "Where?" "Trinity Bend." The name carried its own weight in North Star Falls. Trinity Bend lay beyond the southern edge of town, where the river curved around abandoned mills, flooded service roads, and properties purchased through companies that existed only on paper. Federal narcotics agents had watched the area intermittently for years, but ownership changed so often that warrants rarely led to anything more useful than empty buildings. Talia opened a map on her screen. The file was recorded 6 days ago. Rachel's phone embedded the coordinates before the video was copied to the drive. The signal points to an old farm about 12 miles south. Specific property: former dairy operation. Tax records list the owner as a holding company dissolved 3 years ago. That was enough for a location, but not enough for Adrian to ignore Victor's warning. He found the chief in his office and placed the map beside the preliminary report. Victor read in silence, silver hair reflecting the pale light from the window. "You're not going alone," he said. "I wasn't planning to." Victor studied him long enough to make clear that neither man believed that answer completely. He assigned Officer Marin Holt, a 36-year-old patrol officer, known for remaining calm when other people mistook speed for competence. Marin was tall, narrow-shouldered, and steady-eyed, with dark blonde hair braided tightly beneath her winter cap. She asked few questions, but the questions she did ask were usually the ones that prevented someone from making a costly assumption. They left North Star Falls in 2 vehicles. The snowfall weakened as they drove south, changing first to sleet and then to cold rain that streaked diagonally across the windshield. Orion rode in the rear of Adrian's SUV, wearing the soft recovery harness fitted by the veterinary technician. He remained tired, but the sight of Rachel's coat had awakened something stronger than exhaustion. Adrian had sealed one sleeve in a scent bag for comparison. He did not let Orion track from the moving vehicle. The dog was not trained for police searches, and Adrian refused to pretend otherwise. Still, when the road narrowed and the industrial buildings gave way to flooded fields, Orion rose and pressed his nose toward the glass. The farmhouse appeared beyond a line of dead elms. It leaned slightly toward the river, its white paint nearly stripped away by years of wind. One section of the roof had collapsed over an empty milking shed. A rusted weather vane turned unevenly above the barn, squealing each time the wind shifted. Marin parked behind Adrian and approached his window. "No vehicles," she said. "No visible movement." "Doesn't mean empty," Adrian agreed. They called the location in, documented their arrival, and approached from opposite sides of the yard. Orion remained on a short lead beside Adrian, his nose moving rapidly through the damp air. The front door was open by several inches. Adrian announced their presence. "North Star Falls Police." "Anyone inside?" Rain tapped against the porch roof. No answer came. Marin looked through a broken side window. "Kitchen's been disturbed." Adrian tried the door with 2 fingers. It swung inward. The smell was immediate: mildew, old beer, damp insulation, and something chemical beneath it. The kitchen had been abandoned in haste. A chair lay overturned beside a table, crowded with empty cans and disposable food containers. Mud crossed the floor in several directions. A roll of duct tape sat near the sink beside a pair of work gloves. Marin photographed the room while Adrian checked the adjoining hallway. A family photograph hung crooked on the wall. Rachel stood in the center with Noah in front of her, and Evelyn at her side. Orion sat beside the boy, ears upright, one paw resting over Noah's boot. The right side of the photograph had been torn away. Only part of a man's shoulder remained. "Damon?" Marin asked. "Most likely." Orion stepped toward the picture and touched his nose to Noah's image. The movement was so careful that Adrian felt something tighten behind his sternum. Then Orion turned sharply toward the rear of the house. A narrow hall led to a cellar door. The padlock had been cut. The broken pieces remained on the floor, bright metal exposed beneath the rust. Adrian drew his weapon. Marin positioned herself beside the frame. They announced themselves again. This time, something answered from below. A scrape, then a weak voice. "Please." Adrian opened the door. The cellar steps descended into darkness. He switched on his flashlight and moved down while Marin covered the stairwell behind him. The beam found shelves, cracked jars, and a concrete floor stained by years of groundwater. At the far side of the room, a man sat tied to a wooden chair. Duct tape bound his wrists behind the backrest. A strip of cloth had been knotted around one ankle. His flannel shirt was soaked through at the shoulders, and his black hair hung damp past his ears. A small gear-shaped tattoo marked his right wrist. He looked no older than his early 30s, but fear had hollowed the skin beneath his eyes. "Don't shoot," he said. "Name," Adrian ordered. "Caleb Dorsey." "Anyone else here?" Caleb shook his head too quickly. "They left." "Who?" His eyes moved past Adrian. Orion had reached the bottom step. The dog stopped. Caleb's face drained of what little color remained. "That dog should be dead." The words changed the room. Adrian lowered himself slightly, keeping his weapon ready. "You know him?" Caleb swallowed. "I saw him at the house." "Rachel Arden's house?" Caleb nodded. Orion did not approach. His ears angled backward and a warning vibration moved through his chest. Caleb pulled against the tape as though the dog frightened him more than the gun. "I didn't touch the kid," he said. "I swear." Adrian moved closer. "Start with Damon." Marin came down behind him and cut the tape from Caleb's wrists while Adrian questioned him. Caleb had worked occasional construction jobs for Damon Arden over the previous year. At first, he had been paid to move crates from river docks to vacant buildings. Damon described the contents as imported fixtures and electrical parts. Caleb had believed him until one crate split open. "There were bags inside," he said, rubbing circulation back into his hands. "Pills, powder, cash wrapped in plastic. Why didn't you go to the police?" Caleb looked at the floor. The answer did not need much imagination. "Damon paid you," Marin said. "Yes." And when you knew what you were carrying, Caleb's jaw tightened. He paid more. Adrian let the admission remain between them. Caleb had not been deceived for long. He had made a choice, then continued making it. What changed? Adrian asked. Rachel found the records. According to Caleb, Damon had used the Arden house as a temporary transfer point because Rachel's night shifts left the garage empty for long periods. She discovered false invoices and photographs on an old tablet, then began collecting everything she could find: bank transfers, license plates, names, and storage locations. She planned to give it to somebody at the hospital, Caleb said. Security, maybe police. I don't know. Damon found out. Caleb nodded. He went crazy, said the house, the land, all of it should have been his anyway. He wanted her to sign everything over before she talked, and Rachel's family? Leverage. The word sounded rehearsed, perhaps one Caleb had heard Damon use until cruelty began to feel administrative. Where are they now? Adrian asked. I don't know, Orion growled. Caleb recoiled. I'm telling you the truth. They kept moving them. Houses, storage buildings, wherever Damon thought nobody would look. Who is they? Damon and 2 men from the river, one called Rusk. I never knew the other one's real name. What happened to Orion? Caleb stared at the dog. At the first place, Damon went after the boy. The dog got between them and tore into Rusk's arm. They beat him, put him in the truck, and drove him north. Adrian's voice became quieter. Why north? To dump him. Caleb's breathing became uneven. Damon said the dog wouldn't survive the cold. He came back without him. Orion remained beside Adrian, muscles rigid beneath the black and tan coat. Adrian thought of the chain at Riverside Park. Someone else had found Orion after Damon abandoned him. Someone had attached the note, placed the suitcase beside him, and chosen a location where police would eventually pass. Rachel might have had help, or she might have escaped long enough to give Orion one final task before being taken again. Where did they hold the family before this farm? Adrian asked. Caleb hesitated. Marin crouched until their eyes were level. If they die while you are deciding whether to protect Damon, that decision belongs to you. Caleb looked away. Black Hollow Quarry. The quarry sat 6 miles west of Trinity Bend, abandoned after a winter collapse killed 2 workers almost a decade earlier. Its service tunnels and storage buildings had been sealed by the county, though vandals regularly cut through the fencing. Caleb said Damon used an old superintendent's house near the western pit. He moved them after the dog escaped, Caleb said. But they were there. I brought food once. How long ago? 2 days. That established more than a historical connection. It suggested recent confinement and an immediate threat to 3 missing people. Adrian radioed Victor. The chief authorized a welfare search of the specified property and sent an additional unit for Caleb. An ambulance was also dispatched to evaluate him before questioning continued at the station. By the time another patrol car arrived, rain had turned back to sleet. Marin secured Caleb with the responding officers and then followed Adrian toward Black Hollow Quarry. The western service road had not been plowed. Their vehicles stopped at a collapsed gate, forcing them to continue on foot through shin-deep snow. The superintendent's house stood above the quarry pit, a dark rectangle against white stone. Several windows had been boarded. One door hung open, knocking softly against the frame. Inside, the rooms were almost empty. Orion led them toward the kitchen, where a warped shelf had been dragged across a square opening in the floor. Beneath it was a second cellar. The smell below was colder than the air outside: wet limestone, rust, and stale food. Chains had been bolted into one wall. A length of rope remained tied to one ring. 3 empty cans lay near a stained blanket. In the dirt beside them, Adrian found a small metal bracelet. He wiped it carefully with an evidence cloth. The engraving read "No A." Orion pressed his nose close to the bracelet and whined. Marin turned her flashlight toward the wall. Words had been scratched into the stone. The letters were thin and uneven, as though made with the edge of a nail. He makes me sign. Beneath the sentence were the initials R.A. Rachel had been there. Adrian photographed the message, the chains, the blanket, and the bracelet. Every object made Caleb's account more credible, but none revealed where Damon had taken the family afterward. A faint red light blinked behind a stack of broken crates. Marin saw it first. Camera. The device was small, dust-covered, and still powered. Adrian disconnected it without accessing the internal data, then opened the rear compartment far enough to remove the memory card. A faded manufacturer's mark was stamped beneath the battery, Evo Camtech 9. Adrian stopped breathing for a moment. He had seen that name before, not in an evidence report. On a frozen frame from the surveillance system recovered after the fire that killed his wife and daughter. The cameras in that house had failed minutes before the flames spread. Investigators had blamed damaged wiring and closed the case without finding evidence of deliberate interference. Evo Camtech 9, the same model. Marin noticed the change in his face. "You know it?" Adrian sealed the card. "I know the manufacturer." His radio crackled before she could ask more. Talia's voice came through, strained and hurried. "Adrian, don't upload anything from that site." "What happened?" "Someone is deleting the Arden files from the department server." Marin looked at him. "External breach?" Adrian asked. "No, the commands are coming from inside the building." Talia's keyboard clicked behind her voice. "I isolated the evidence room workstation, but reports, call logs, and copies of the audio are disappearing. Whoever is doing this has internal access. Can you stop it? I can slow it down." Adrian looked at the sealed memory card in his hand. "Keep every surviving file offline." "Already doing it." The signal broke into static. Adrian placed the memory card in the inner pocket of his coat rather than the field upload pouch. The case had changed again. Damon was not merely hiding in abandoned properties. Someone inside the North Star Falls Police Department was protecting him, or protecting whatever larger operation stood behind him. Marin moved toward the stairs. "We need to get this evidence out." Orion did not follow. He stood near the wall, head tilted toward the ceiling. A growl rose slowly from his chest. Adrian shut off his flashlight. Marin did the same. In the darkness, they heard it. A floorboard creaked above them, then another. Slow footsteps crossed the kitchen, stopping directly over the cellar door. Someone had followed them into the quarry house, and whoever stood upstairs already knew exactly where they were. The footsteps stopped directly above the cellar door. Adrian stood in darkness with one hand resting on Orion's recovery harness. Across from him, Marin held her weapon close to her chest, her silhouette barely visible against the weak gray light leaking through the floorboards. A metallic scrape came from the kitchen, then the cellar door slammed shut. The sound of a chain being drawn through the handle followed. "They're locking us in," Marin whispered. A moment later, Adrian smelled gasoline. The odor seeped through the gaps overhead, sharp enough to burn the back of his throat. Whoever had followed them had no intention of entering the cellar. Adrian switched on his flashlight and swept the beam across the stone walls. The stairs were no longer an option. The old house above them creaked as someone moved quickly toward the front exit. Marin tried her radio. Static. "The quarry walls are blocking us again." Orion pulled toward the rear corner of the cellar. His nose moved along the ground before rising toward a narrow seam behind the iron support beam Adrian had noticed earlier. Cold air flowed through it. Adrian crossed the room and pushed against the loose stones. One shifted beneath his glove. "Drainage access," he said. Together, he and Marin pulled away crumbling mortar until they exposed a rusted maintenance panel. The bolts were almost fused in place, but Marin used the pry bar from her belt while Adrian drove his shoulder against the metal. Above them, liquid splashed across the kitchen floor. Orion barked once. The panel tore loose. Beyond it was a narrow service tunnel no more than 4 feet high, built decades earlier to carry runoff away from the foundation. Adrian pushed Orion through first, then followed on his hands and knees. Marin entered behind him and dragged the panel back into place. They had crawled less than 20 feet when something ignited inside the house. A low concussion traveled through the stone. Orange light flashed behind them. Heat rushed into the tunnel. "Move," Adrian ordered. The passage opened onto the snowy slope behind the quarry house. Orion scrambled out, followed by Adrian and Marin. Smoke already rolled from beneath the roofline. At the far end of the service road, a pair of red taillights vanished behind the trees. Marin raised her radio now that they were clear of the rock walls. "Officer in distress. Black Hollow Quarry. Structure fire. Unknown suspect fleeing west. Adrian stood in the sleet, watching flames appear behind one boarded window. The camera card remained sealed inside his coat. The bracelet bearing Noah's name was secured in Marin's evidence pouch. Whoever had tried to trap them had failed to destroy everything. But the attempt made one fact undeniable. Damon knew the police were close. By the time firefighters reached Black Hollow, the upper floor was burning beyond entry. Adrian and Marin gave their statements from the back of an ambulance, while Orion lay between them beneath a thermal blanket. Talia arrived before midnight. Her copper-red glasses were dotted with sleet, and loose strands of hair had escaped her braid. She carried no laptop bag this time, only an encrypted external drive held inside her coat. "I saved part of the server cache," she said. "Not much." Adrian looked toward the burning house. "Anything useful? A vehicle ping." She showed him a map on her phone. The last GPS signal associated with Damon's white pickup had appeared west of North Star Falls shortly before the Arden files began disappearing. The location was broad, covering several miles of wooded road, an abandoned grain elevator, and a housing development left unfinished after the financial collapse. "The ping is 8 hours old," Talia warned. "It's still a direction." Victor ordered Adrian and Marin off duty until morning. He also placed the station's internal network under restricted access and called the state police to investigate the breach. Adrian took Orion to the county clinic. The veterinarian found no new injuries, but warned that exhaustion was becoming as dangerous as the cold. Orion received fluids and slept for several hours, with his head resting beside Rachel's sealed coat sleeve. Adrian remained in the chair outside the examination room. He did not sleep. At first light, the storm had passed. Snow covered North Star Falls beneath a hard blue sky. Sunlight glittered across rooftops and frozen drainage ditches, bright enough to make the previous night feel distant. It was not. Marin joined Adrian at the western checkpoint shortly after 7. Talia coordinated from the station while state investigators reviewed building entry records and computer access logs. Orion had been cleared only for limited movement. Adrian placed him in the rear seat with water, blankets, and the recovery harness. They began a slow grid search of the roads surrounding Damon's last GPS signal. Nothing moved among the abandoned fields. They passed the old grain elevator just after 8. Its sail stood above the trees like gray towers, streaked with rust and winter light. Adrian continued another 100 yards before Orion rose suddenly in the rear seat. The dog pressed his nose toward the passenger side window. A strained whine escaped him. Adrian slowed. Orion pawed once at the door, then turned toward the trees behind the grain property. Marin studied the shoulder of the road. There. 2 tire tracks entered the snow through a gap in the brush. Adrian pulled over and notified dispatch. They followed the tracks on foot, leaving the patrol vehicle visible from the road. Orion moved beside Adrian, not dragging him forward, but testing the air with short, urgent breaths. A white pickup stood abandoned beneath a group of bare birch trees. The license plate matched Damon Arden's registration. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, Marin found an empty coffee cup, a wet work glove, and a parking receipt from the previous evening. Adrian moved to the rear of the truck. The tailgate hung partly open. A chemical odor drifted from beneath a canvas tarp. Marin pulled it back with gloved hands. There were rolls of duct tape, nylon cord, stained towels, and a half-empty brown bottle bearing a veterinary sedative label. One towel carried a dark red smear. Adrian photographed everything before touching it. Orion approached the tailgate and lifted his nose. His ears went forward. Adrian opened the scent bag containing Rachel's coat sleeve and allowed Orion to smell it. The dog turned immediately toward the woods. Beside the truck, depressions in the snow formed an uneven trail. 2 sets of boot prints headed west. Between them ran a long drag mark. Marin called the Discovery Inn and requested medical units, additional officers, and a perimeter around the abandoned development beyond the trees. "We wait for backup?" she asked. Adrian listened. At first he heard only wind moving through dry branches. Then Orion whined again. Far ahead, barely carried through the trees, came a single sound. A cough, human, weak. Adrian looked at Marin. That changes it. She nodded. They advanced along the trail while responding units approached from the road behind them. The trees opened onto a neighborhood that had never been completed. Rows of houses stood beneath the snow, some little more than wooden frames. Others had siding but no doors. Window openings had been sealed with plywood, making the structures look blind. Street signs leaned at odd angles. Unfinished driveways ended in weeds and frozen mud. No power lines reached the homes. The drag marks disappeared where wind had swept across the open ground. Orion moved from one foundation to the next, pausing at doors, discarded lumber and tire impressions. At the end of the development stood a 2-story house with gray siding. Every window had been covered from the inside. Orion stopped at the collapsed porch. His whole body became still. From inside came another cough. Then a sound so quiet Adrian almost mistook it for the settling of wood, a child crying. Marin moved to the rear entrance while Adrian announced them at the front. "Police, if anyone can hear me, call out." No answer. The door was secured with screws driven through a metal plate into the frame. Adrian struck near the lock with a breaching tool from Marin's vehicle kit. The frame split on the third blow. They entered with weapons raised. The house smelled of damp lumber, human sweat, and unwashed clothing. Blankets covered the walls where windows should have been. The rooms were almost empty except for food wrappers, a broken lantern, and a child's red winter boot lying beside the stairs. Orion touched his nose to the boot. A sound came from beneath the floor. Adrian pulled back a stained rug in the living room. A square hatch had been cut into the subfloor. A heavy padlock held it closed. "Police," Adrian called again. "We're here to help." A faint voice answered from below. "Please." The word was almost breathless. Adrian broke the lock. Cold air rose from the opening. He descended first. The flashlight revealed 3 figures against the basement wall. A woman lay on her side with her wrists bound in front of her. Her chestnut hair had come loose around a pale, exhausted face. Beside her, an elderly woman with short silver hair leaned against the stone, one arm wrapped protectively around a small boy. The boy wore a green hoodie. His face was pressed against the older woman's shoulder. "Rachel Arden?" Adrian asked. The younger woman opened her eyes. Before she could answer, Orion pushed past Adrian. The dog crossed the basement in 3 uneven strides. "Noah," Rachel whispered. The boy lifted his head. For a moment, he stared as if his mind could not accept what his eyes were showing him. "Orion." The dog reached him. Noah's arms closed around Orion's neck, and the sound that came from the child was neither laughter nor crying, but something caught painfully between them. "You came back," he said. Orion pressed his head beneath Noah's chin, tail striking the floor. Adrian knelt beside Rachel and cut the bindings from her wrists. "You're safe," he said. "Officers and paramedics are outside. My mother will help all 3 of you." Evelyn Arden was small and frail beneath a cream sweater, but her brown eyes remained focused. She had wrapped a burgundy scarf around Noah's hands to keep them warm. "He needs water first," she said. Even after captivity, her instinct was to care for the boy before herself. Marin descended carrying emergency blankets and bottled water. She checked Evelyn while Adrian helped Rachel sit upright. Orion refused to move from Noah's side. As paramedics entered, the dog shifted to block the unfamiliar hands approaching the child. He did not growl, but positioned himself across Noah's knees. "It's okay," Noah whispered, touching the golden streak beneath Orion's eye. "They're helping." At the sound of the boy's voice, Orion stepped aside. Only then did Adrian notice blood spotting the floor beneath the dog's left front paw. A strip of broken glass lay near the hatch stairs. Orion had crossed it during his rush to Noah. Adrian wrapped the paw with gauze from the medical pack. Orion barely reacted. His eyes stayed on the boy. Rachel watched him. "Damon threw him out of the truck," she said weakly. "I thought he was dead. The suitcase was with him. I put it there." Adrian looked at her. Rachel took a careful breath. "When they moved us the first time, Damon loaded the suitcase into the truck because he thought it held clothes and hospital papers. He didn't know I'd hidden the recordings and photographs inside." Her voice trembled, but she continued. At Riverside Park, one of the men stopped to change vehicles. Damon ordered him to get rid of Orion. I had the note ready. I tied it to the suitcase handle and pushed the case out after the dog. You were in the vehicle, in the back, bound. How did Orion end up chained? I don't know. The man took him behind the trees. I heard the chain. Rachel's eyes filled, but she did not look away from the dog. I prayed someone would find them before Damon realized what was inside. Noah held Orion closer. He told me Orion wouldn't come back. Rachel looked toward Adrian. There's one more file. What kind? A ledger. Names, payments, storage properties, officers he bribed. Damon kept the only full copy because he didn't trust the people he worked for. Where is it? He said he was taking it to the old industrial warehouse near the river. He planned to leave the state once I signed the final transfer. Which warehouse? North River Freight, the blue building behind the grain terminals. Adrian knew it, a maze of lodeos, conveyor rooms, and abandoned offices beside the frozen river. Paramedics lifted Evelyn onto a stretcher. Rachel was helped toward the stairs, while Noah refused to leave until Orion moved with him. Outside, red and blue lights reflected across the unfinished houses. The family had been found alive. Adrian should have felt the pressure inside him release. Instead, he looked west toward the river. Damon still had the ledger. He still had help inside the department. And now that Rachel had escaped his control, he had nothing left to protect except himself. Adrian rested one hand on Orion's shoulder as Noah was carried toward the ambulance. The dog had completed the mission Rachel had given him. Adrian's was not finished. Rachel Arden spoke from a hospital bed with her son asleep beside her. Morning light entered through the blinds in narrow white bands, crossing the bruises along her wrists and the thin hospital blanket pulled over her legs. Evelyn rested in the adjoining room, monitored for dehydration and hypothermia. Orion lay at the foot of Rachel's bed, his injured paw wrapped in clean gray bandaging. He had refused the veterinary kennel after treatment. The hospital staff eventually allowed him to remain because Noah's breathing became steadier whenever the German Shepherd was near. Adrian stood beside the window, fighting the heaviness behind his eyes. He had been awake for nearly 2 days. Apart from a few minutes in a chair at the clinic, his uniform carried dried mud from the unfinished development, and the sleeve of his winter coat still smelled faintly of smoke from Black Hollow. Rachel watched him before continuing. Damon didn't start with the drugs, she said. He started by deciding everything belonged to him. Her voice remained quiet but no longer weak. He chose where we lived, who I spoke to, when Noah could visit friends. He checked my phone bills and called the hospital if my shift ended late. Adrian had heard similar accounts during domestic calls. Control rarely announced itself as violence in the beginning. It arrived disguised as concern, efficiency, or protection until the person inside it no longer remembered where permission ended and fear began. "When did you learn about the shipments?" he asked. "Last spring. I came home early and found crates in the garage. Damon said they were imported fixtures for a job site." Rachel glanced down at Noah. 2 weeks later, one broke open. There were vacuum-sealed bags inside. After that, I started checking invoices. The 12 acres of riverfront land Rachel had inherited from her father bordered a service road leading toward Trinity Bend. Damon had realized the property could provide storage and private access to the river without attracting attention. When Rachel filed for divorce, he began demanding that she transfer the land, the house, and her savings into his name. "He said I owed him," she continued. "He said everything he had built depended on me signing, and the evidence, I took pictures whenever he left the paperwork out. I recorded him because he always sounded reasonable around other people." A faint bitterness entered her voice. He knew exactly how to become calm when a neighbor or police officer was nearby. She had copied bank transfers, storage addresses, and names from Damon's office computer. Most had gone onto the external drive inside the suitcase. The documents were supposed to reach a hospital security supervisor who had previously worked for the state police. Damon discovered the copies before Rachel could deliver them. "He came home with 2 men," she said. They took my phone first. Then they brought Noah and my mother into the kitchen. Orion's ears shifted at the change in her breathing. Rachel reached toward him. The dog rose carefully and placed his muzzle beneath her hand. I didn't teach him to attack, she said. I taught him to stay with Noah. That was all. Adrian looked at the bandage around Orion's paw. He understood. He always did. Rachel's fingers moved along the dog's dark muzzle. When Damon lost control, Orion put himself between us. Every time. Even when he knew what would happen. The room became quiet. Noah stirred, one hand finding the fur along Orion's back without opening his eyes. Rachel looked at Adrian. I didn't send Orion away because I wanted him safe. I sent him because he was the only one Damon never thought could carry the truth. The words stayed with Adrian after he left the room. In the corridor, Talia was waiting beside a vending machine with her laptop open. Her copper-red glasses had slipped low on her nose, and a paper cup of untouched coffee sat on the floor near her boots. I found Damon, she said. Adrian stopped. Rachel's description of North River Freight matched an old property registration. Damon's burner phone connected to a maintenance tower near the river at 6:12 this morning. She rotated the screen. A map showed the abandoned grain transfer complex east of the frozen shipping channel. The main warehouse had once stored corn and wheat before loading it onto river barges. Several silos remained, along with conveyor tunnels, offices, and a wide loading bay facing the water. The phone is still active? Adrian asked. Intermittently. He turns it on for less than a minute, probably checking messages. Enough to place him inside? Within 200 yards. Police Chief Victor Sloan arrived before Adrian could respond. He had already requested a state tactical unit and ordered North River Freight surrounded. You're going to sit this one out, Victor said. Adrian met his eyes. I found the victims. I know Damon's voice, vehicle, and behavior. You also haven't slept. I can still function. That isn't the same as being fit for a gunfight. Victor's tone held no anger. That made the refusal more difficult to challenge. Adrian looked through the glass panel in Rachel's door. Orion had settled beside Noah again. If Damon sees officers he doesn't know, he may destroy the ledger before they identify him. Talia can identify him. She can identify his face. I know what happens when he hears Rachel is no longer under his control. Victor studied Adrian for a long moment. You stay under Lieutenant Finch's command, he said at last. You do not improvise, and you do not enter until the perimeter is secure. Adrian nodded. And the dog stays out of the building. That condition was not negotiable. A mobile veterinarian checked Orion again before the team departed. The cut on his paw was painful but shallow. His temperature and hydration had improved, though the veterinarian limited him to brief movement and warned against running or jumping. Orion would accompany them only to the staging area, where he might confirm Damon's scent on any discarded clothing or vehicle. He would remain with Marin behind cover once the tactical team moved in. The grain depot stood beneath a brilliant winter sky. Sunlight flashed across the frozen river, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Rust-colored silos rose above the warehouse roofs, and wind moved powdered snow through the loading yard in thin white ribbons. Lieutenant Carla Finch took command of the entry team. She was lean, composed, and precise, with pale blue eyes and dark hair secured beneath a black tactical helmet. Carla spoke without raising her voice, assigning positions with the certainty of someone who expected every order to survive contact with fear. Marin remained with Orion near an abandoned scale house east of the loading yard. Adrian joined Carla and two state officers approaching the southern loading bay. Another team covered the river exit. Talia's voice came through Adrian's earpiece. 3 heat signatures in the main warehouse. 1 near the office level, 2 on the loading floor. Any movement? One of them is carrying items toward the furnace room. They reached a shattered window overlooking the warehouse interior. Damon stood near an oil drum with flames rising from its open top. He wore a black canvas work jacket over a gray hoodie. His light brown hair had been pushed back from a face made gaunt by sleeplessness. A silver chain hung at his throat, catching the firelight whenever he turned. Stacks of paper lay on a pallet beside him. Two men carried canvas bags toward a white delivery van parked inside the loading bay. One was thickset and bearded. The other had a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his forearm. Rusk. Orion's bite had left its mark. Carla signaled the teams into position. Adrian saw the ledger before Damon reached for it, a black binder resting on a metal desk near the burning barrel. "Police," Carla called. "Step away from the fire and show your hands." The thick-set man froze. Rusk dropped one bag and reached toward his waistband. A state officer trained a rifle on him. "Don't." Rusk lowered his hand. Damon did not move. His gaze traveled across the officers before settling on Adrian. "You," he said. Adrian stepped no farther into the open. "Rachel is alive." The statement struck harder than a threat. Damon's face changed, not with grief, relief or surprise, but with outrage. "No. Rachel, Noah and Evelyn are safe. You're lying. It's over, Damon. Move away from the weapon and get on the floor." Damon looked toward the black ledger, then toward the burning barrel. He kicked the pallet. Paper slid into the fire. Carla's team advanced. Damon drew a pistol from beneath his jacket and fired. The first round struck a steel beam. The second shattered glass above Adrian's head. Everyone moved at once. Carla returned fire toward cover, forcing Damon behind a stack of wooden crates. Rusk dropped to the floor. The thick-set accomplice ran for the northern exit and was intercepted by the river team. Adrian crouched behind a conveyor housing. Smoke from the burning documents spread through the warehouse, mixing with grain dust and cold air pouring through the broken windows. "Talia," Adrian said into the radio, "can you see Damon?" Moving west behind the sorting equipment, a shadow crossed the elevated walkway. Adrian shifted position. Damon appeared at the far end of the conveyor line, pistol held close to his chest. He was trying to reach the office stairs and the ledger. "Damon!" Adrian called. The man turned. "Your son is alive," Adrian said. "Do one thing for him that doesn't leave another wound." For half a heartbeat, Damon hesitated. Then his expression hardened. "He was mine before she poisoned him against me." He raised the gun. The shot struck the edge of Adrian's cover and sent a shard of metal across his upper arm. Heat tore through the sleeve of his uniform. Adrian fell back. At the scale house, Orion heard the gunfire. Marin tightened her grip on the lead, but the dog had already risen. He could not see Adrian through the walls, yet he recognized the voice shouting inside the warehouse. Another gunshot echoed. Orion pulled. "Stay," Marin commanded. The dog looked at her, then toward the loading bay. A side door burst open as Rusk tried to escape. Marin moved to block him, momentarily shifting her grip while drawing her weapon. Orion tore free. He crossed the snow despite the injured paw, entered through the open loading door, and followed Adrian's voice into the smoke. Adrian saw him too late. "Orion, no!" Damon stepped around the conveyor housing. Gun pointed downward at Adrian. Orion struck him from the side. The dog did not bite immediately. His shoulder collided with Damon's forearm, forcing the muzzle away as Damon fired. The bullet entered Orion high in the left shoulder. He dropped with a sharp cry. Adrian lunged forward and struck Damon's wrist. The pistol skidded across the concrete, but Damon caught Adrian's injured arm and drove him against the conveyor frame. Damon reached for a second weapon at his ankle. A red aiming point appeared across his chest. Carla stood at a side window with a clear angle, hands away from the weapon. Damon ignored her. Carla fired once. The round struck his weapon-side shoulder and spun him onto the floor. Officers rushed forward, kicked the second pistol away, and secured both hands behind his back. The warehouse went suddenly quiet except for the crackle of burning paper. Adrian crawled toward Orion. Blood darkened the fur above the dog's shoulder. His breathing was fast, but his eyes remained open. "Stay with me." Adrian pressed gauze against the wound while Marin arrived, carrying the trauma kit. "You were supposed to stay outside," she whispered, anger and fear breaking through her usual control. Orion's tail moved once against the concrete. Fire crews extinguished the barrel before all the records burned. Officers recovered the black ledger, false deeds, packaged narcotics, account books, and a handwritten list of payments. 2 names on that list belonged to local officials. One belonged to a civilian employee inside the North Star Falls Police Department. Talia identified him within minutes. Simon Pell, a records administrator with extensive gambling debt, had used his access card to enter the station's archive room. State officers arrested him at a bus terminal with cash, a portable drive, and several undeleted evidence backups in his bag. Damon and both accomplices were taken alive. When the paramedics reached Adrian, he refused treatment until Orion had been placed on a stretcher. The warehouse floor was cold beneath him. Smoke drifted toward the rafters, and red emergency lights moved across the dark blood on his sleeve. Adrian kept one hand against Orion's neck. "You found them," he said. "You protected Noah. You carried the truth when no one else could." Orion opened one amber eye. Adrian lowered his forehead against the dog's. "And when I thought I was the one bringing you home, you saved me too." 4 months after the shooting at North River Freight, winter had begun loosening its grip on North Star Falls. Snow still covered the courthouse steps, but water ran beneath the ice along the gutters. The morning sky was pale blue, bright enough to reflect from every window of the Redwood County Superior Court. Adrian Knox stood in the second-floor hallway with his left hand resting near Orion's collar. The gunshot wound in the German Shepherd's shoulder had healed into a narrow strip of lighter fur. Orion no longer limped, though the veterinarian had not yet cleared him for strenuous work. He wore a plain black collar and no canine harness. Whatever future role awaited him had not yet been decided. Adrian's upper arm had healed as well. A faint stiffness remained when he reached too quickly, but the wound was easier to carry than the memory of Orion falling on the warehouse floor. Inside the courtroom, Damon Arden sat beside his defense attorney. 4 months without control had altered him. The heavy work jacket and silver chain were gone. He wore a charcoal suit provided by counsel, but the clean clothes could not hide. The anger gathered around his mouth. His light eyes moved constantly toward the jury, toward the evidence table, toward Rachel. Rachel sat between Noah and Evelyn in the front row. Her chestnut hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. A slate blue blazer covered most of the scars around her wrists, though she had made no effort to conceal them entirely. Noah wore a dark green sweater and held one hand beneath the bench, where Orion could occasionally touch his fingers. Evelyn sat upright beside them, silver hair curved toward her jaw and a burgundy scarf folded across her lap. No one in the family looked unhurt. They did look present. That difference mattered. Judge Margaret Vale, a composed woman in her early 60s with short iron-gray hair, entered shortly after 9. The courtroom rose, then settled into a silence interrupted only by the rain beginning against the tall windows. Damon faced charges of kidnapping, aggravated domestic assault, coercion, attempted murder, narcotics trafficking, falsifying property transfers, and obstruction of justice. The state had divided the evidence into separate categories, but Adrian understood that all of it came from the same belief inside Damon. If he could control a person, then he owned everything attached to that person, their money, their home, their fear, even their silence. Assistant District Attorney Naomi Bell began with the suitcase. She was a slender woman with close-cropped black hair and a voice that never needed to become loud. She placed the old leather case on the evidence table without drama. The travel stickers had faded further during months in storage. The cracked handle still carried the blue thread Rachel had used to fasten the note. Naomi lifted the sealed paper. "Please save him," she read. "He is the only evidence." Damon's attorney objected when she emphasized the word evidence. Judge Vale overruled him. One by one, the contents were introduced. Photographs of Rachel's injuries, falsified transfer documents, the external drive, hospital records, the gray coat, and the image showing Orion's distinctive black toes beside Rachel's hand. Talia Monroe testified first. She wore a cobalt blazer and her familiar copper-red glasses. On the monitor beside the jury, she displayed the forensic process used to copy the external drive without altering the original data. "The timestamps are internally consistent," she explained. "The files were created across 6 weeks. None show signs of editing after they were recorded." The defense attorney stood. You cannot prove who held the device when those recordings were made. No, Talia said. You cannot prove that Mrs. Arden was not directing someone else to create them. No, and you cannot prove that every voice on those files belongs to my client. Talia adjusted her glasses. I compared the primary male voice with authenticated jail calls, recorded interviews and video recovered from North River Freight. The probability of a mismatch is extremely low. The attorney attempted to interrupt. Talia continued. The account numbers visible in the financial documents also led to transfers controlled by Damon Arden. Those transfers corresponded with GPS data from his registered vehicles and with warehouse leases signed through companies he managed. Her tone remained calm. She was not asking the jury to trust intuition. She was showing them a structure that did not depend upon sympathy. The prosecutor played one recording. Damon's voice filled the courtroom. You want your mother safe? You want the boy safe? Then you sign what I put in front of you. A child cried in the background. A dog barked with frantic force. Orion lifted his head. Adrian felt the dog's body tighten beside his leg. He placed his palm against Orion's shoulder, not to restrain him but to remind him where he was. The barking ended when Naomi stopped the recording. Orion remained still. Across the aisle, Damon watched him with an expression Adrian could not fully read, not fear, resentment, as if the dog had committed an act of disobedience by surviving. Rachel took the witness stand after lunch. Naomi did not ask her to begin with the kidnapping. Instead, she asked when she had first become afraid of her husband. Rachel looked toward the jury. There wasn't one moment, she said. That was the problem. She described the small decisions Damon had taken from her before he ever struck her. He controlled the bank statements, questioned every late shift, and decided which neighbors were trustworthy. When Rachel disagreed, he withdrew money, broke objects, or stood in doorways until she stopped trying to leave. He could explain everything afterward, Rachel said. He always had a reason that made me sound unreasonable. She told the jury about discovering the crates in her garage and finding financial records connected to properties near Trinity Bend. She explained how she photographed documents at night, hid recordings on an external drive, and planned to deliver the evidence through hospital security. Then she described the night Damon arrived with two men. Noah was in the kitchen, she said. My mother was trying to keep him behind her. Her voice thinned. Damon grabbed me. Orion came between us. The German shepherd's ears moved at the sound of his name. He didn't attack because I told him to. I never trained him for that. He stood across Noah's body and refused to move. Rachel paused until she could continue. Damon hit him. Orion fell, got up, and stood there again. The courtroom remained silent. When they moved us, I hid the drive and photographs in the suitcase. At Riverside Park, the truck stopped. One of the men took Orion out because Damon said to leave him in the cold. Rachel's hand closed around the edge of the witness box. I tied the note before they pulled me back. I pushed the suitcase out after him. I didn't know whether anyone would find either of them. Naomi approached with the original note sealed in plastic. Why did you write that Orion was the evidence? Rachel looked toward the dog. Because everything Damon tried to hide was written on him. The wounds, the fear, the fact that he kept trying to get back to Noah. For the first time that day, Damon turned away. Noah's testimony took place with special accommodations approved by the court. He sat at a smaller witness table rather than the raised stand, with a child advocate nearby. Orion remained with Adrian behind the rail, visible but not close enough to influence Noah's answers. The prosecutor's questions were simple. Where did Orion sleep while you were being held? Near the door. Why? So he could hear Damon coming. What happened when Damon entered? Noah looked at his hands. Orion stood up. Did Orion ever leave you? No. The boy's lower lip trembled. Once Damon pulled me by my coat. Orion got between us and Damon kicked him. A stir moved through the courtroom. Judge Vale silenced it with a look. Noah raised his eyes toward the jury. Orion didn't bite him that time. He just stayed in front of me. Were you afraid Orion would not come back after he was taken away? Yes. What made you believe he might? Noah looked across the room at Adrian. Because Orion always came back after Damon hurt him. His voice became quieter. I thought maybe this time he would come back with someone stronger. Adrian lowered his eyes. Orion moved close enough for his shoulder to touch Adrian's boot. The gesture was small, almost invisible beneath the rail, but it changed something inside Adrian. Until then, the trial had felt like the final task in an investigation. Evidence assembled, procedures followed, testimony preserved. Noah's words made him understand what he had represented from the beginning. Not strength in the way the boy imagined it. An answer to the faith Noah had placed in his dog. When Adrian was called, the defense focused immediately on Orion. You relied on an untrained animal to direct a criminal investigation, the attorney said. No. Orion led you to multiple locations. He reacted to familiar scents and people. Those reactions helped us decide what evidence to examine. Every search was supported by records, witness statements, GPS information, or an immediate threat to life. You named him within an hour of finding him. Yes. So you became emotionally attached. Adrian considered the question. Yes. The defense attorney appeared surprised by the answer. Wouldn't that attachment affect your judgment? It could have. And did it? It made me more careful. The attorney frowned. Adrian continued before another question came. Orion was never proof that Damon Arden committed a crime. A dog cannot testify about coercion, bank transfers, or kidnapping. Orion gave us reasons to keep looking. The evidence came from what Damon left behind. Naomi presented the final chain. Caleb Dorsey's statement, the quarry seller, Noah's bracelet, Rachel's words carved into the wall, the hidden camera, the abandoned truck, the blood and sedatives, and the ledger recovered from North River Freight. Simon Pell had already pleaded guilty to obstruction and accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for authenticated records showing Damon paid him to delete police files. The defense argued that Caleb and Simon were criminals trying to save themselves. Naomi agreed that they were. Then she showed the jury how their statements matched independent evidence created before either man began cooperating. The jury deliberated for nearly 7 hours. By the time they returned, night had settled over the courthouse windows. Damon stood for the verdict. Guilty of kidnapping, guilty of aggravated assault, guilty of coercion and attempted fraudulent transfer, guilty of narcotics trafficking, guilty of attempted murder and obstruction. The words arrived one after another, each without celebration. Rachel closed her eyes. Evelyn held one of her hands. Noah held the other. Damon shouted only after the final count. 2 deputies restrained him while he accused Rachel, the police, and even Noah of betraying him. Judge Vale ordered him removed. Sentencing would take place several weeks later, but the mandatory terms alone ensured Damon would spend decades in prison. Outside the courtroom, Rachel did not smile. It doesn't feel over, she told Adrian. It probably won't for a while. Noah sat on the hallway floor beside Orion. Does he have to go back with us now? He asked. Rachel looked at her son, then at the dog resting against Adrian's leg. Orion loved Noah. No one in the hallway doubted that. But during the months of recovery, he had also begun following Adrian from room to room, sleeping beside his front door and waiting for the sound of his patrol keys each morning. Rachel knelt beside Noah. What do you think Orion wants? Noah buried his fingers in the thick fur around the dog's neck. He wants both. The answer carried no jealousy, only understanding. The arrangement was settled through the shelter, the veterinarian, and the department rather than through emotion alone. Rachel remained Orion's legal owner until she signed a formal transfer. Noah would visit every week, and Orion would stay with the family whenever Adrian's work required travel. Adrian did not promise the dog would become a police K9. Orion was not trained for apprehension, and no one wanted to reshape his protective instincts into aggression. Instead, Adrian applied with him for the department's Community Crisis Response Program. If Orion passed medical, behavioral, and public access evaluations, he could work beside officers during welfare checks, hospital visits, and trauma support. A week later, the department held a small commendation ceremony. Victor Sloan pinned the Medal of Bravery and Service onto Adrian's formal Navy uniform. Carla, Marin, and Talia stood nearby. Rachel, Noah, and Evelyn watched from the front row. When Victor handed Adrian a smaller engraved medallion for Orion's collar, applause filled the briefing room. Adrian knelt beside the German shepherd. "This belongs to you," he said. Orion sniffed the medallion, then looked toward Noah. Adrian followed his gaze. "No," he corrected softly. "It belongs to all of us." That evening, Adrian completed the adoption documents at Harbor House. When he stepped outside, Orion waited beside him beneath a street lamp while light snow moved across the parking lot. Adrian opened the rear door of the SUV. Orion did not hesitate. He climbed inside, circled once on the gray blanket, and lay down with his head facing Adrian's seat. This time, there was no suitcase between them. There was no chain. Only the first quiet mile of the life they had chosen to build together. Spring arrived slowly in North Star Falls. For weeks, winter seemed unwilling to release the town. Snowbanks remained along shaded streets, gray at the edges and hard as stone. Then the temperature rose for 3 consecutive days, and water began moving everywhere at once. Beneath sidewalks, through gutters, and under the thinning ice along the river. At Riverside Park, small green chutes pushed through the damp ground beside the walking path. The river no longer sounded trapped. It moved openly beneath the morning sun, carrying broken plates of ice downstream. Adrian Knox stood near the last bench facing the water, one hand resting loosely around a black leash. The bench had been repaired. Fresh cedar boards replaced the weathered slats. The metal supports had been sanded clean, and the leg where the chain had once been fastened showed no trace of rust. Beside it stood a low stone marker surrounded by newly planted crocuses. A brass plaque had been fixed to the front, for every soul who waited, and was finally found. Adrian read the words again, although he already knew them by heart. The shelter volunteers had suggested a dozen alternatives. Some mentioned courage, others named Orion directly. Adrian had rejected anything that turned the park into a monument to heroism. Waiting had been the truth of it. Rachel, Noah, and Evelyn had waited in dark rooms. Orion had waited beside the bench. Adrian had waited years for a reason to believe that not every loss ended in silence. Orion sat beside his left leg. The German shepherd no longer resembled the animal Adrian had lifted into the patrol SUV 3 months earlier. His black and tan coat had grown thick and glossy. The curved black saddle above his right hip was sharply defined again, and the narrow cream marking on his chest showed through the harness straps. The rounded notch in his right ear and the 2 black toes on his left front paw remained unchanged. Around his neck hung a silver tag engraved with his name. Beneath it, a smaller line read, "Community Crisis Response." The title was provisional for another 2 weeks. Orion had completed his medical clearance, public access evaluation, and basic response training, but the final certification required several supervised field visits. Adrian did not mind the waiting. He had learned that a title mattered less than the work that justified it. Orion looked toward the park entrance before Adrian heard the approaching voices. Noah appeared first. He ran down the path in a red brick jacket, one hand holding a blue flying disc against his chest. His brown-blonde curls had grown longer over the winter, and the freckles across his nose seemed darker beneath the spring light. Orion. The dog rose so quickly that Adrian released the leash before it tightened. Orion crossed the grass in a full run. Noah dropped to his knees. The German shepherd pressed into him with enough force to push them both sideways. Noah laughed into Orion's fur, arms wrapped around the dog's neck while Orion's tail struck the wet grass. Rachel followed at a slower pace with Evelyn beside her. Rachel looked healthier than she had in court. Color had returned to her face, and her chestnut hair moved freely around her shoulders, instead of being tied back with clinical precision. She wore a light denim jacket over a cream sweater and carried herself with a caution that no longer looked like fear. Evelyn walked with a polished wooden cane, though Adrian suspected she used it more to satisfy her doctor than from actual need. Her burgundy scarf remained folded neatly at her throat, and her copper-framed glasses caught the sunlight. "You let him win again," Rachel called. "I didn't have a choice," Adrian said. He saw the disc. Noah stood and threw it. The disc sailed low across the lawn. Orion chased it, gathering speed without favoring the shoulder that had once carried a bullet wound. He caught the disc after one bounce and returned with his head held high. Noah reached for it. Orion turned away. "That's cheating," Noah said. "He learned negotiation from the court system," Evelyn observed. Adrian smiled. The expression still felt unfamiliar on his face when it arrived without effort. They gathered near the restored bench. Rachel placed a small pot of white flowers beside the crocuses. She did not explain what they represented, and Adrian did not ask. Some gestures became smaller when interpreted aloud. Rachel had moved with Noah and Evelyn to a rented house on the eastern side of town, far from Willow Creek Road. She had returned to North Star Falls Regional Hospital on reduced hours, working daytime shifts until she felt ready to enter the building after dark. The old house remained sealed as evidence until Damon's appeals were resolved. Rachel had not visited it. She said she might one day. She also said she might never need to. Evelyn had begun volunteering twice a week at the County Family Resource Center. She answered phones, organized clothing donations, and sat with women waiting to speak to advocates. "I don't give advice," she told Adrian. "People who have had their choices taken away don't need another stranger telling them what to do." Instead, she made tea and listened. Noah had returned to school. He still woke some nights believing he heard a truck outside. Rachel no longer tried to convince him the sound was imaginary. She sat with him, checked the windows, and reminded him where Orion lived. Knowing the dog was 6 minutes away had become part of Noah's ability to sleep. Adrian kept his phone beside the bed. Noah had called only once. He had not needed to say anything. Adrian had placed the phone near Orion's collar, and the child had listened to the faint sound of the tag moving while the dog breathed. After less than a minute, Noah whispered that he was all right. Noah threw the disc again. This time, Orion brought it directly back and placed it in his hands. "You're getting soft," Adrian said. Orion looked toward him, mouth open in what appeared dangerously close to satisfaction. Rachel sat on the bench. "I thought coming here would be harder." Adrian remained standing. "Is it?" "Yes." She looked at the river, "but not in the way I expected." The park no longer belonged only to the memory of the suitcase or the chain. Children rode bicycles along the path. A couple walked beneath the budding trees. Somewhere near the playground, a dog barked at a squirrel. Life had returned without asking whether the place was ready. Rachel touched the edge of the brass plaque. "I used to think surviving would feel like being finished with it." Adrian understood. "It doesn't." "No." She watched Noah run beside Orion. "It feels more like having room for something else." A dark sedan stopped near the park entrance. Talia Monroe stepped out carrying a thin gray folder beneath one arm. She wore a charcoal coat over a cobalt sweater, and the spring wind immediately loosened several curls from the knot behind her head. Adrian recognized the expression on her face before she reached them. It was the look she wore when information mattered but did not yet form an answer. Talia greeted Rachel and Evelyn, then handed Noah a small paper bag from the bakery near the station. "For sharing," she warned. Noah looked inside. "How much sharing?" "Legally, half." He took the bag and retreated with Orion toward a picnic table. Talia turned to Adrian. "I brought something." Rachel rose. "We can give you privacy." Adrian glanced at the folder. "No. You don't have to leave." Rachel studied him, then nodded and joined Evelyn near the flower beds. Talia offered the folder. The label on the front carried a case number Adrian had not seen in years. The fire that killed his wife Claire and their daughter Lila. His hand did not move at first. The small cobalt enamel star attached to his patrol keys rested in his jacket pocket. He felt one uneven point press against his knuckle as he closed his fingers around it. "What changed?" he asked. The ledger from North River Freight contained payments to a company that serviced surveillance systems, Talia said. That company installed the Evo Camtech cameras in Damon's properties. Adrian looked toward the folder. The same model from the quarry. Yes. And the house. Yes. Talia spoke carefully. One payment was made 2 weeks before your fire. The account led to a subcontractor who worked on the monitoring system in your neighborhood. Adrian felt the park become strangely quiet, although the sounds around him had not stopped. Was Damon involved? We don't know. Was the fire deliberate? We don't know that either. Talia did not soften the uncertainty. The state fire marshal reopened the case because the original camera failure may not have been accidental. There are missing maintenance logs, an altered service timestamp, and a payment that was never disclosed. Adrian finally took the folder. It was lighter than he expected. For years he had imagined that truth, if it ever arrived, would carry weight. It would strike with certainty, divide his life cleanly into before and after, and explain why he had been left behind. Instead, it arrived as 27 pages of incomplete records beneath a gray cardboard cover. Talia watched him. You don't have to open it here. Adrian looked at the repaired bench. The last time he had stood in that place, the world had placed a starving dog, a blood-stained suitcase, and an impossible request in front of him. He had acted because something living needed help. The folder was different. No one would die if he waited an hour. No one needed him to become stronger before reading it. He sat on the bench and placed the file beside him without opening it. Talia's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's new. What is? You not letting a case decide the next thing you do. Adrian looked across the lawn. Noah was breaking a pastry into pieces at the picnic table. Evelyn called for him not to feed Orion, while Orion watched the food with disciplined innocence. Rachel caught Adrian's gaze. She did not ask what was in the folder. She simply remained where he could see her. Adrian realized that 3 months earlier he would have left the park immediately. He would have driven to the station, locked himself in an office and read every page until the facts blurred into accusation. Now the folder could wait beside him. That did not mean the past had lost its power. It meant the past no longer had the only voice. Noah returned carrying the flying disc. Can I ask something? Adrian nodded. Who did Orion save the most? Rachel gave her son a warning look. That isn't a competition. I know. I just mean, was it me, Mom, Grandma, or you? Noah looked toward Orion, who had settled between them. Adrian considered the question. He saved your family, he said. Noah waited. He helped save the case, too, because he carried what your mother gave him. And you? Adrian looked down at the dog. Orion's amber eyes met his without urgency. There was no warning in them now, no road he needed Adrian to follow. Yes, Adrian said. Me too. How? Adrian glanced at Rachel, Evelyn, and Talia. He reminded me that coming home isn't always about returning to the place you lost. Noah thought about that. Sometimes it's finding a new place. Sometimes it's finding people who leave the door open. Noah smiled as if the answer made perfect sense. They remained in the park until the sunlight turned warmer and the morning chill lifted from the grass. Rachel and Evelyn eventually followed Noah toward the parking lot. Orion walked with them halfway, staying close to the boy. At the path's curve, the dog stopped. Noah knelt and pressed his forehead to Orion's. Next Saturday? Adrian nodded. Next Saturday. Orion watched the family continue toward their car. He did not whine or pull after them. When they were gone, he returned to Adrian's left side. Talia had already left, but the gray folder remained on the bench. Adrian picked it up. This time, his hand did not shake. He and Orion began walking along the river path as sunlight moved through the new leaves overhead. The German shepherd kept pace beside him, occasionally turning to look back toward the place where Rachel, Noah, and Evelyn had disappeared from view. He did not have to choose between them. Love did not become less true when it found another home. At the park entrance, Adrian looked once over his shoulder. The repaired bench stood beneath the budding trees, the brass plaque shone in the late morning sun, and the flowers Rachel had brought moved gently in the wind. It was the place where Orion had once waited in silence. Now there was only an empty bshi, a broken chain long removed, and a path leading forward. Adrian touched the cobalt star in his pocket. Then he opened the rear door of the SUV. Orion climbed inside, settled on the gray blanket, and looked toward him. Adrian placed the unopened folder on the passenger seat. There would be time for answers. For now, they had somewhere to go. Sometimes healing does not begin when every question is answered. It begins when we choose to keep walking, even while carrying what we have lost. Adrian, Rachel, Noah, and Orion remind us that home is not always the place we return to. Sometimes it is the trust we rebuild, the life we protect, and the people who leave the door open for us. May God bring peace to the parts of your heart that are still waiting to be found. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope.